She often complained that he was too soft. When he stayed quiet instead of raising his voice, she thought it was weakness. When he smiled instead of arguing, she called it fear. When he chose patience over anger, she whispered to her friends that he wasn't man enough. To her, strength was measured in dominance, in a man's ability to control, to demand, to shout louder than anyone else in the room. But she had forgotten what his gentleness really meant. Those same hands she called too soft had once worked long nights to keep food on their table. They had carried heavy bricks in the sun when there was no job, just so their children wouldn't go hungry. Those hands had held her trembling shoulders the night her father died, steadying her when she wanted to collapse. They had wiped her tears without words, knowing she didn't need speeches, just presence. But she didn't remember those things. Or maybe she remembered but ignored them. He still loved her with the same quiet strength. Every morning he'd rise before her, careful not to wake her. His rough palms, softened by care, would prepare the children's breakfast, tie shoelaces with a patience most men would laugh at, and send them off with smiles. When she woke, the house always smelled of tea and bread, but she hardly noticed. To her, he was invisible. She longed for something else, something louder, more forceful. She used to roll her eyes whenever he spoke. His voice was low, calm, never rushed. He listened more than he talked, and when he did speak, his words came gently, like ripples across still water. But to her it felt dull, almost irritating. "Why can't you ever be firm?" she snapped once after he spoke kindly during an argument. "Why do you always sound like a teacher calming children? You're a man, act like one." He had only smiled, the corners of his lips curved in quiet sadness. Because shouting won't make you listen. And love doesn't need loudness to be real. But she didn't believe him. She mocked him to her friends, imitating his soft tone, exaggerating his patience until they laughed. To her, his gentleness was weakness, his silence was emptiness, and his soft voice was nothing compared to the thundering words she imagined a real man would use. So when another voice came into her life, sharp, commanding, heavy with authority, she thought she had found what she had been missing. His words weren't gentle, they struck like hammers. They filled the room with dominance, leaving no space for her own. At first she mistook it for strength. She liked how he interrupted, how he decided, how he never asked, only ordered. That's a man, she told herself. Not someone who whispers, but someone who commands. But with time those commands turned into chains. At dinner he didn't ask what she wanted, he told her what to eat. At gatherings he didn't invite her into conversation. He silenced her with a look. At home his words weren't discussions, they were orders. And when she tried to speak, to offer her thoughts, he cut her off. "Quiet. Don't argue with me." The first time she laughed nervously, brushing it off. The second time she stayed silent out of fear. By the third, she realized she no longer had a voice in her own life. His commands were loud, yes, but they carried no patience, no understanding, no love. They weren't words meant to guide, they were words meant to control. She had once laughed at her husband's soft voice, but now she longed for it. She remembered the way he spoke when she was angry, never meeting fire with fire, only calm. She remembered how he explained things, never making her feel small, never silencing her. She remembered his patience, the way his voice softened even more when she was upset, as if his only goal was to ease her heart. And now, as she sat in a room filled with orders shouted like thunder, she realized what she had lost. The voice she once mocked was the voice that had carried love, the voice that had carried her through storms without ever needing to raise itself. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she could almost hear him again. His gentle tone, his soft patience, the words she had once brushed aside. They felt like home. But when she opened her eyes, there was no softness around her, only commands that left no room for her soul to breathe. It was then she understood. His soft words had never been weakness. They had been strength disguised as kindness. And she had traded them for noise that drowned her spirit. By the time the truth sank into her heart, it was too late. The man whose words carried patience had walked away, taking with him the quiet love she had only learned to value when it was gone. He always smiled at her. Not the kind of smile meant for strangers, polite and shallow, but a smile that carried warmth, like sunlight after a long night. It was a smile that belonged only to her, soft, reassuring, patient. Even when she scolded him, even when she dismissed him with irritation, he met her harshness with that same quiet curve of his lips, as if reminding her that nothing she said could make him stop caring. But she never saw it for what it was. To her, his smile was routine, predictable, even boring. She wanted something more dramatic. Laughter that filled the air, intensity that made her heart race, expressions that came with fire instead of gentle warmth. His smile, so constant and calm, felt invisible. She ignored it, brushed it aside, and told herself she deserved more than a man who simply smiled through everything. When another man entered her life, she thought she had found the fire she was craving. His face was strong, sharp, his eyes piercing. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was brief and intoxicating, like a rare glimpse of approval. She mistook his coldness for mystery, his seriousness for depth, and told herself, "This is what I want. This is real." At first it thrilled her. The intensity in his eyes made her feel chosen, desired, important. She grew addicted to it, forgetting the quiet smile that used to greet her every morning, the warmth she had once taken for granted. But with time, the thrill faded and the truth revealed itself. His eyes were not mysterious, they were cold. They did not soften when she was tired, did not shine when she laughed, did not hold patience when she made mistakes. They judged. They calculated. They demanded. His gaze felt less like love and more like scrutiny, like a hunter watching his prey. One evening, after he left her apartment in anger, she sat in silence, staring at her reflection. Her face looked pale, tired, drained of joy. She tried to remember the last time someone had looked at her with warmth instead of frost, the last time a gaze made her feel safe instead of small. And suddenly she remembered. It was his smile. The man she had left behind, the one she ignored, mocked, dismissed. He had smiled at her in ways that spoke louder than words. His eyes had always softened when they met hers, his lips always curved with patience, even when she didn't deserve it. He never looked at her like a burden, never judged, never froze her with coldness. He had loved her so quietly that she hadn't even noticed. Her chest tightened as the memory flooded back, how he used to greet her at the door, how his smile lit up when she entered a room, how he made her feel safe even in silence. She had thought it was ordinary, too ordinary to matter. But now, sitting alone, she understood, it wasn't ordinary. It was everything. And she had thrown it away for eyes that never smiled at her, for lips that only curved when power was in his hands. The irony cut deep. She had ignored warmth until it was gone, only to find herself shivering in the coldness she had chosen. That night, she cried quietly, not because of the man with cold eyes, but because she finally understood what she had lost. The smile she had once ignored was the kind of love people search for their whole lives. And she had let it slip away. He had always been her shield. Not the kind that stood tall with fists raised, but the kind that moved quietly, removing obstacles before she ever saw them. When they walked through crowded markets, his hand rested lightly at her back, guiding her safely through the chaos. When neighbors spoke too harshly, he deflected with calm words, turning storms into drizzle before they touched her. But she never saw these things. To her, protection looked different. She imagined a man who barked orders at strangers, who raised his voice, who stood like a warrior ready to fight anyone who dared to cross her path. In her heart, she equated love with possession and protection with domination. So when he spoke softly, when he shielded her not with anger but with patience, she misunderstood. "You're not protective," she said once, bitterness in her voice. "You're just passive. You let things happen." He looked at her with quiet surprise. "I let nothing happen to you," he said. "I take the blows before they ever reach you." But she shook her head, unable to see the strength behind his gentleness. The truth revealed itself years later when another man stepped into her life. This one was bold, loud, sharp as fire. He didn't shield her quietly, he commanded, he controlled, he dominated. At first, it felt like power, like safety wrapped in authority. His words carried force and she mistook it for care. "Stay home," he told her, and she thought it was protection. "Don't speak," he ordered, and she believed it was love. But soon the mask fell away. Domination wasn't protection, it was a cage. His rules weren't safety nets, they were chains. When she tried to voice her thoughts, he silenced her. When she tried to step outside his boundaries, he dragged her back with words sharper than knives. His version of protection was suffocation, and his love was a prison disguised as strength. One night, after a fight that left her shaken, she sat in the dark replaying his words. "I protect you from yourself," he had said, his tone filled with arrogance. She realized then that he wasn't shielding her from the world, he was shielding the world from her, clipping her wings, forcing her into silence. And suddenly her mind went back to her husband. The man she had once dismissed, whose quiet ways she had mocked. She remembered the times he stayed awake when she was sick, cooling her forehead with a cloth. She remembered how he never let her feel unsafe in a crowd, how he stood beside her without raising his voice, how he fought battles with calmness so she wouldn't have to fight at all. His protection had never been domination, it had been love. Tears filled her eyes as the truth burned inside her. He hadn't been weak. He had been strong in ways she never understood. Real protection wasn't about possession. It was about care without control, strength without suffocation. But by the time she realized it, he was no longer there. She had left the man who shielded her with love, only to find herself caged by the man who disguised control as protection. And in the silence of that night, she whispered into her hands, "I misread him. I misread everything." He wasn't a man of many words. His silence wasn't cold but thoughtful, the kind of silence that listened instead of interrupted. When she spoke, he let her finish. When she cried, he let her release every tear without rushing to correct her pain. When she shouted in frustration, he stood still, allowing her anger to pass without meeting it with fire. But she didn't see the respect in that silence. To her, it felt like absence. She wanted noise, reaction, passion expressed in raised voices and sharp debates. His quiet ways left her restless. "Why don't you ever speak?" she asked once, irritation dripping from her tone. "Why do you always just sit there? Do you even care?" He looked at her with soft eyes and said, "My silence is my care. I want you to feel heard, not silenced." But she didn't understand. She mistook his restraint for emptiness, his calm for lack of strength. When another man entered her life, loud, commanding, always speaking first and last, she thought she had found the voice she was missing. His words were sharp, filling every silence with authority. She mistook it for passion, for involvement, for love that didn't hide in silence. But soon she discovered the truth. This man's voice wasn't about giving, it was about taking. When he spoke, it wasn't to listen but to dominate. When she tried to express herself, his words cut her off mid-sentence. "Enough," he would snap. "Don't argue." His voice didn't fill silences, it buried hers. The first time it happened, she froze, stunned. The second time, she forced a smile, telling herself it was just his nature. By the third, she realized she no longer had the space to speak at all. His voice was everywhere. It dictated what she wore, how she behaved, where she went. It didn't matter if she whispered her thoughts. His thunder always drowned them out. What she had once mistaken for passion revealed itself as control. And control doesn't love, it commands. One evening, after being silenced yet again at the dinner table, she sat in her room replaying memories of her husband. His quiet presence came flooding back. She remembered how he would wait until she was done talking, then respond with words chosen carefully, not to overpower but to comfort. She remembered how his silence wasn't empty, it was full of patience, a gift that allowed her voice to matter. Her chest ached at the contrast. She had once complained that his silence hurt, but now she sat in a house where her own silence was forced upon her. And for the first time, she longed for the man who had let her voice bloom instead of wither. That night, she whispered into the darkness, "Your silence gave me space. His voice takes it away." The pain of realization settled deep inside her. What she once called emptiness was actually respect, and what she thought was strength was only control. But she had chosen wrong, and the man who had given her silence filled with love was gone. She once thought his gentleness was a flaw. The way he opened doors for her, carried her burdens without being asked, and spoke with a voice that never rose above calm, it all seemed too ordinary, too quiet. She wanted fire, a man who moved the world with his presence, who carried an edge that others feared. So she abandoned him. She walked away from the man who never let her cry alone, who smiled when she was angry just to ease her heart, who worked through exhaustion without complaint. She told herself she deserved more than softness, that strength was louder, sharper, harder. And she thought she found it. The new man was everything her husband wasn't: bold, aggressive, full of confidence. His words cut through the air, his stance demanded attention, his laughter carried arrogance. He didn't bend, he broke. He didn't ask, he commanded. At first, it felt intoxicating, like power had finally wrapped itself around her. But power without love is cruelty. It began slowly, an impatient tone when she spoke too long, a hand that held too tightly, a voice that dismissed her feelings. Then it grew, mockery in place of comfort, commands in place of care, punishments in place of patience. The strength she thought she had found was nothing more than a blade against her soul. One night, after he stormed out, leaving her in tears, she sat by the window and thought of the gentleness she had abandoned. She remembered the man whose kindness never wavered, who stayed silent when she insulted him, not because he was weak, but because he loved her too much to wound her back. She remembered how his touch never left bruises, how his voice never silenced hers, how his love was never a cage. And she wept. Because now she knew the truth. gentleness had been strength all along. The softness she mocked was not weakness, it was the rare courage to love without cruelty. She had traded it for harshness that called itself power but lived as abuse. In her search for strength, she had destroyed the very shelter that once protected her. And by the time she realized her mistake, the man whose gentleness she abandoned was gone, taking with him the love that could have saved her. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her scarf for the 10th time, as if perfecting her reflection could somehow mend the cracks in his heart. The house felt colder than ever, not because of the weather but because of his silence. He sat in the courtyard, sipping tea slowly, his eyes fixed on the ground as though every answer to his pain lay hidden in the dust beneath his feet. She brought him his favorite dish, the one she had cooked countless times in the early days of their marriage when laughter still lived between them. He took a bite, polite but distant, as if she were a stranger feeding him. She tried soft words, carefully chosen, hoping they would weave bridges across the distance. She tried tears, letting them fall openly, hoping they would soften the stone he had built around his heart. She tried laughter, pretending to stumble, pretending to joke, hoping the sound might remind him of what they once shared. She tried gifts, small things bought with trembling hands, hidden in his pockets, left on his bed, desperate tokens of love now met with silence. She even tried anger, shouting at the emptiness in him, hoping a spark of his old self would flare up and fight with her, because even fighting was better than this nothingness. But every attempt fell into a void. He had already crossed into a place where her efforts could not reach. What she didn't know was that respect, once lost, does not return with effort. It does not return with apologies, with meals, or with tears. Love may forgive, but respect, once shattered, often dies quietly, leaving nothing but silence behind. That night, when she placed her hand on his arm one last time, whispering, "Please, I can't lose you," he turned to her slowly, his eyes empty of warmth. His words were gentle, but they carried the final weight of truth. "You already did." Her cries echoed through the small house like a storm no one wanted to notice. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her chest as if the pain inside might rip through her skin. Tears poured down her face, but he sat across the room, silent, unmoved, staring at the wall as though her voice had never existed. She cried louder, hoping the force of her grief would reach him, would break through the cold shield he had wrapped around himself. She called his name again and again, her voice trembling, desperate, cracking into pieces. But every sound she made was swallowed by his silence, and silence proved stronger than every scream. Neighbors could have heard her if they listened closely. The walls carried her sobs, the night carried her broken whispers, but no one came. It was as if the world had decided her tears were meaningless. She wasn't crying for help anymore, she was crying for the man who once held her when she trembled, who once wiped those same tears with his hands. But now, those hands stayed folded in his lap, motionless, unwilling to reach for her. She wept until her voice was raw, until her body ached from the weight of sorrow, until she realized something cruel. Silence can kill love faster than anger, and sometimes the most painful answer is no answer at all. She stood at the doorway, her eyes searching for his. He was reading, quietly, as he always did after long days of work. She cleared her throat, shifted her weight, even let out a loud sigh, waiting for him to look up. But his eyes never lifted from the page. She wanted his attention, craved it like air, but she had never given him what he needed most: respect. She dismissed his efforts when he provided, mocked his silence when he chose peace, and spoke louder than his voice when he tried to explain. In her world, attention was love, and love meant he should bend to her needs. In his world, love could not survive where respect was denied. She tried again, louder this time, asking questions she didn't really mean, making small dramas out of nothing, hoping he would put his book aside. He didn't. His silence was not anger, it was exhaustion. He had learned long ago that giving her attention only fed her pride, not their bond. When she finally snapped, "Why don't you listen to me anymore?" he looked up slowly, his face calm but his eyes heavy. His reply was simple, but it cut through her cries: "You never listened to me either." And in that moment she realized the cruel truth: attention without respect is noise, and love without respect is already gone.